How's it going, guys? Welcome to another video. Today I want to talk about the Fujifilm XF 18-55mm, the variable aperture one, f2.8-4. And I want to talk about this lens because I think it places a very interesting role inside my kit, especially for travel. Personally, I think it is the best travel lens amongst like zoom lenses, at least for Fujifilm's system, and I'll give you a couple reasons as to why. So I've taken this lens out on a few trips already, on camping and hiking and stuff like that, and this lens plays a very interesting role, especially in the way that I like to use it. Alright, first off, let's go ahead and talk about size and build quality, because I think there's a lot of unique aspects about this lens that go along with that. So in my opinion, size is one of the biggest things in terms of travel. You don't want to carry a lot of lenses, or a lot of big lenses for that matter. So when I was searching for kind of a zoom lens, I wanted something that would cover the entire standard focal ranges that I needed it to without being too big. So I had the 16-55mm and I still have it, but it was kind of too big for me to take on travel. So I was looking at the 18-55 as a better solution for that. And I think it's really good. And in terms of build quality, a lot of people consider this lens a really good build quality because it's mainly metal, and this is why it shouldn't be underestimated as just a kit lens, because it is not your average kit lens. Most kit lenses tend to be made out of plastic materials and are generally cheap build qualities, but the XF 18-55mm is a really good build quality. The zoom ring is really nice. The aperture ring is a click aperture, but it doesn't have any markings because it's a variable aperture lens, and the manual focus is, well, it's okay, but I don't expect it to be anything crazy for this kind of lens. So that's kind of that. Moving on. The next thing I want to talk about is focal range, because as far as zoom lenses go, this has a very solid standard set of focal ranges. It's an 18-55, so you get your 18, you get your 23, you get your 35, and you get your 55. And I feel like this is very versatile for most types of photography and videography. Where it might be lacking might be on the wider end or more telephoto end. So if you're looking for something wider, which I was thinking about picking up a slightly wider prime to kind of fill in that gap, then that is an option as well. But I think for what this lens offers, it's a very solid standard focal set. You're not going to be limited in terms of your telephoto side, and you'll get a fairly wide end on the 18mm as well. That, I think, is another positive upside of this lens. Next up, let's talk about aperture, because this is something that I had kind of a concern about when I was considering buying this lens. It's a variable aperture, so it goes from f2.8 to f4, and it switches as you change your settings between the focal length. So at 18mm, it would have f2.8 as its widest setting, and then at 23, it would have 3.2, then 3.6, and then finally 4.0. So it's not bad. It's honestly not as bad as I thought it would be. I preferred a fixed aperture, which is why I went with the 16-55 initially, but the f2.8 to f4 is honestly not as bad as I thought it would be. Another reason why this is really good for this lens is because it's wider than your typical kit lenses. Usual kit lenses won't allow you to go as wide as f2.8 on the wide end, so I find this being another selling point of this lens as well. One of my main concerns about having a variable aperture was I was worried I wouldn't get enough background separation, especially on the telephoto end. But as I was using this lens, I realized that aperture only plays part of the role in the background separation thing. Another important part is the kind of telephoto compression look that you get when you switch up to higher or closer focal lengths. So something like a 55mm at f4 is actually good enough to get a solid amount of background separation. So it wasn't as limiting of a factor as I thought it would be. Now obviously, if I had like an f1.2 or 1.4 kind of lens at the 55 end, then I'm going to be able to get a crazy amount of bokeh and background separation. But is it enough to like limit me from using this lens? No, I think the 18-55 is a good median between all of these kind of aspects. Another concern I had with the sort of variable aperture thing was its low light performance capability, and I'll be honest, it's not that good, especially because when you have an f4, it's really hard to get good low light images and video and stuff like that. f2.8 on the wide end isn't that bad, but honestly it's not the best. Now I can kind of get away with it on the X-T4 because X-T4 has a pretty good ISO bump, so I bumped to about 6400 ISO and I can get some good quality shots with it, especially with this lens, but it's not the best low light performance capabilities. So for those situations you might want to switch to a different lens or just have a different zoom if that is your priority. Now let's go ahead and talk about autofocus, because this lens has a linear motor autofocusing system, which is one of Fujifilm's newer autofocusing motors, which means it's going to be faster and it's going to be more accurate than the other lenses. So photographic purposes, this lens has no problems focusing. I honestly have rarely missed autofocus shots with this lens for photography. What my main concerns were for video. Because I primarily bought this lens as a video lens, so that was my main concern, whether it would hold up. So for talking head purposes and things like that, it's perfectly good. I rarely miss focus and it's pretty solid throughout all those scenarios. But when I'm behind the camera and I have multiple subjects in front of me like people, sometimes it would get confused as to which the actual subject is, and then it would kind of switch between those two things. So autofocus on this lens is good, but it's not amazing, I would say. And I tried this at various different settings at the X-T4. At the end of the day, it's not too big of a problem because I started switching to manual focus for video, so I would just back button autofocus and then kind of adjust as my components of the video frame kind of move and shift and stuff like that. So I think manual focus is a really good skill to learn, especially for video if you're worried about poor autofocus and stuff like that. But most situations, autofocus for this lens is good, but I tend to use manual focus more because I find it more reliable, and sometimes this lens does hunt. So that's just something to be noted. Now let's go ahead and talk about image quality and sharpness, because I think that is one of the primary concerns for a lot of people. This is not the most sharpest lens, and I know there is some kind of lens variance for this lens, especially the one I got was used off eBay, made in Japan, so I was hoping that the image quality and the sharpness of this lens would be good, but to be honest, it's not bad. It's okay in my opinion, but that might just be in my mind comparing it to the 16-55mm, which is reputably one of Fujifilm's sharpest lenses. So as far as this go, I'm not gonna do like a sharpness test or sharpness scale. This is just based on my observation, is that it's pretty sharp, but it's not amazingly sharp, or it's not the sharpest lens you can find, you know what I mean? I've shot with lenses like the 18mm f2, which is not reputably one of Fujifilm's sharpest lenses, and it has a character of its own, and I personally like it as well. So I feel like autofocus and getting stuff in focus is more important than a completely purely sharp lens. Next up, let's talk about OIS, or image stabilization, because I think this is what makes this kit lens really good for travel, and it also puts it in kind of like a really interesting line of Fujifilm's zoom lenses. So image stabilization is important to me. Obviously, it's not the most important thing out there, but for video and travel, it comes in really handy, especially because the X-T4 doesn't have the best image stabilization out there. Sometimes I would get a little bit of warping, and this lens kind of makes up for that, which is really awesome. So image stabilization is useful for a few different things. It's useful for video if you're trying to get some standard still shots without getting too much wobble or anything like that, and you don't have to whip out a tripod. But it's also really useful for things like shutter speed. So like I said before, a big concern of this lens was that it wouldn't be able to do well in low light. But you can make up for this lens's poor low light capability by dropping the shutter speed. So I could go as low as 1/30th or 1/15th or something like that, and combined with the OIS on this lens and the IBIS from the X-T4, you can get some really good low light quality shots just from taking advantage of the optical image stabilization in this lens, which is actually really good. I think lens image stabilization is better than body image stabilization. So that was a really important aspect for this lens for me as well, and I think it makes it even better for traveling and stuff, because when you're camping, you would find yourself in a lot of low light situations because there aren't lights around, especially when you're in the mountains and stuff like that. So you can kind of scrape away with some good low light shots. Honestly, it's not the best, like I said before, but it's workable. So anyways, those are some of the aspects I found interesting about this lens. Overall, would I recommend it? Yes, I would recommend it. I feel like I use this lens almost all the time, especially if I'm going out to travel, just because it's so small, it's so versatile, and it gets the job done. It's really, really unique. So this lens fits well into my system personally. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please leave them down below. And also if you have any experience with this lens and would like to share them with others, I feel like that would be helpful as well. So if you could comment down that below, that would be awesome. And if you like this video, please do like the video down below, subscribe to this channel for more videos, and I'll see you guys in another video. Thank you guys for watching. Peace.